The wedding hall looked like a dream. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead, scattering golden light across silk-draped tables. The sweet fragrance of roses mingled with the aroma of gourmet dishes, and the air buzzed with laughter, chatter, and the clinking of glasses. It was the kind of wedding that looked like it had been pulled straight out of a magazine, grand, luxurious, and meticulously designed to impress. Yet, amid the glamour and elegance, one man seemed strangely out of place, not because he lacked wealth, but because of the emptiness in his eyes. That man was Alexander Reed, the CEO of Reed Enterprises, one of the most powerful business empires in the country. At 34, Alexander was everything the world believed defined success: tall, broad-shouldered, strikingly handsome with piercing gray eyes, and dressed in a black tuxedo that fit him as though it were sculpted on his frame. To the outside world, he was the perfect picture of wealth and power. But Alexander Reed was also the loneliest man in the room. He had arrived alone, as he always did. His driver had dropped him off at the steps of the luxury hotel, and while couples and families entered together, Alexander walked in solitary silence. Though people glanced at him with admiration, whispering about his fortune and influence, none dared approach him. His presence carried an invisible wall, built from years of mistrust, disappointment, and the cold shield he had placed around his heart. The wedding he attended was for the daughter of a longtime business partner. He hadn't truly wanted to come, but obligations weighed heavy on him. Skipping such an event would be considered rude, and business alliances were fragile things, maintained not just in boardrooms but also at celebrations like these. So here he was, seated at a corner table, nursing a glass of champagne and pretending to be busy with his phone. Alexander disliked weddings. They reminded him of what he lacked. He had no one waiting at home, no warm hand to hold, no family to fuss over him. His parents had died in a tragic accident when he was just 16, leaving him to fend for himself. Instead of drowning in grief, he had buried himself in ambition. He built his empire from the ground up, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. But in chasing wealth, he had locked his heart away. Over time, loneliness became a part of him, something he carried like a shadow. He glanced around the room. Everyone was smiling, talking, embracing. Couples leaned into each other, whispering sweet nothings, parents fussed over their children, and the bride and groom radiated joy. It should have been heartwarming, but to Alexander, it only magnified the emptiness inside. He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair, and muttered under his breath, "Another night to endure." As the evening unfolded, the master of ceremonies announced that the entertainment segment was about to begin. Guests clapped politely, expecting a famous singer or a polished band. But when a young woman stepped onto the stage, murmurs of surprise rippled through the hall. She wasn't dressed like the others. While most women sparkled in designer gowns, this girl wore a simple white dress that looked homemade. Her long brown hair was loosely tied back, and her shoes were slightly worn. In her hands, she carried a weathered guitar, its wood scratched and faded. Some guests exchanged puzzled glances. Others chuckled softly, whispering about how out of place she looked. But when she strummed the first chord, everything changed. Her voice, clear, soft, and filled with raw emotion, rose into the air. It wasn't polished like a professional singer's, but it carried something far more powerful: sincerity. Each note vibrated with the weight of real experiences, of struggles and dreams, of pain and hope interwoven. The lyrics she sang told a story. It was a song about being invisible in a world obsessed with wealth and appearances. About the silent battles fought by those who had nothing but still carried hope in their hearts. About loneliness that wrapped around the soul like a cold winter night, and the fragile thread of faith that kept a person alive even when the world turned its back. The wedding guests, who had moments ago been whispering and laughing, fell silent. Forks and knives were set down. Conversations faded. All eyes were on the girl with the guitar, as her voice painted emotions that many had forgotten existed. And in that silence, one man felt his walls begin to crumble. Alexander sat frozen, his eyes locked on the stage. Her words struck him like arrows piercing armor. For years, he had convinced himself that nothing could touch him, that money, power, and status had made him untouchable. Yet here he was, a billionaire CEO, unable to stop the storm rising inside him because of a poor girl's song. He felt the lyrics in his bones. The part about losing family reminded him of the day he buried his parents. The lines about chasing dreams while feeling invisible mirrored his own rise to power, where no one believed in him until he had already succeeded. And when she sang of loneliness, of sitting in a room full of people yet feeling completely unseen, Alexander's chest tightened so painfully he thought he might not breathe. His fingers trembled around the glass in his hand. His throat felt dry. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear the sting in his eyes. He wasn't a man who cried. He hadn't cried in decades. But tonight, in this crowded wedding hall, with chandeliers glittering above him and hundreds of strangers watching the stage, tears threatened to betray him. By the time the girl reached the final verse, Alexander could no longer hold back. A single tear slid down his cheek, quickly followed by another. He lowered his gaze, hoping no one noticed, but the floodgates had already opened. His heart, buried under years of solitude, had been touched in a way he never thought possible. The girl's voice trembled slightly as she finished, but when the last note faded into silence, the hall erupted in applause. Guests clapped loudly, some even standing in ovation. The same people who had doubted her now cheered her name. She smiled shyly, bowing her head, clutching the guitar like it was her only shield. Alexander remained seated, but his eyes never left her. He wiped his tears discreetly, his chest still heavy with emotions he didn't understand. Who was she? How had she managed to pierce the heart of a man who prided himself on being untouchable? As the applause died down and the girl stepped off the stage, Alexander made a decision. For the first time in years, he felt compelled to know more, not about a business deal, not about profits, but about a person. That girl. The one whose song had broken through his loneliness. The one who had made a powerful CEO cry. When the girl stepped down from the stage, clutching her guitar nervously, Alexander Reed felt an unfamiliar urgency inside him. He had sat through countless performances in his life, at galas, corporate parties, charity events, but never once had he been moved the way he had tonight. He rose from his chair slowly, ignoring the curious glances from nearby guests. The powerful CEO, who was known for his stoic demeanor and cold detachment, was suddenly walking with purpose, weaving through the crowd toward someone no one would have expected him to notice. The girl had found a quiet corner near the catering area, away from the spotlight. She looked relieved that the performance was over, but also unsure of how the audience had received her. She was adjusting the strap of her guitar when she heard a voice, deep, steady, and commanding. That was extraordinary. Startled, she turned. Her brown eyes widened when she saw who was speaking to her. Alexander Reed, the billionaire CEO everyone whispered about, stood just a few steps away. He looked at her not with arrogance, but with something softer, something she couldn't quite name. "Sir, thank you," she stammered, lowering her gaze. "I wasn't sure if anyone liked it." Alexander's lips curved into the faintest smile. "They didn't just like it. They felt it. I felt it." The honesty in his tone made her heart skip. She had sung at small cafes, on street corners, at open mic nights where most people barely listened. To have someone of his stature say her song had moved him, it was overwhelming. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Lila," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lila Carter." "Lila," Alexander repeated, as though tasting the sound. "You have a gift. One that reaches people, even people who thought they couldn't be reached." There was a pause. For a moment, it seemed like he wanted to say more, but words failed him. He wasn't used to opening up, especially to strangers. And yet, standing before this young woman with a worn guitar, Alexander felt a connection that startled him. "Do you sing professionally?" he asked. Lila shook her head with a small laugh. "Not really. I mean, I'd love to, one day. But right now, I just sing whenever I get the chance. Weddings, little bars, sometimes on the street. It helps pay the bills." Alexander frowned slightly. "The bills?" She nodded, shifting uncomfortably. "I take care of my younger brother. Our parents passed away a few years ago. He's still in school, so I do what I can. Music is the only thing I have, really. And sometimes, it's enough. Sometimes, it's not." Her honesty hit Alexander harder than he expected. He knew the pain of losing parents young, the crushing weight of responsibility. For a fleeting second, he saw his younger self in her, fighting against the world with nothing but determination. Without realizing it, his voice softened. "You remind me of someone I used to be." Lila tilted her head curiously, but before she could ask, another guest called out Alexander's name. Business partners approached, eager to speak with the powerful CEO. The moment between them shattered as quickly as it had formed. Alexander gave her one last look, his gray eyes lingering with something unspoken. It was a pleasure meeting you, Lila. And then he was gone, swallowed back into the crowd of champagne glasses and polite conversations. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He sat in his penthouse apartment, the city skyline stretching endlessly outside his window, but all he could hear was her voice. That song, those words, replayed in his mind over and over. It had touched a wound he thought had long scarred over. He poured himself a drink, but even the burn of whiskey couldn't erase the memory of her trembling yet powerful voice. Lila Carter, he muttered to himself, staring into the night. Who are you? For the first time in years, Alexander felt restless, not because of business, not because of deadlines, but because of a person. A girl with nothing but a guitar had managed to do what no amount of wealth or power could, make him feel again. The following week, Alexander's driver found himself with an unusual task. Sir, are you sure about this? He asked, glancing through the rearview mirror as they drove into a modest part of town, far from the glass towers and luxury boutiques Alexander usually frequented. Yes, Alexander said firmly. Stop near the cafe on 5th Street. I heard she sometimes performs there. And indeed, she did. Through the cafe window, Alexander saw her, Lila, sitting on a stool, singing softly to a handful of customers while her brother, a boy of about 12, did homework at a corner table. The place was small, unremarkable, but her presence lit it up more than any chandelier ever could. Alexander stepped inside. Conversations hushed when people recognized him. What was a billionaire doing here? But Alexander ignored them. He waited until Lila's set ended, then approached. Mr. Reed, she gasped, nearly dropping her guitar. What are you doing here? He smiled slightly. Listening. And, offering. Alexander took a seat across from her. His presence filled the small table, but his voice was gentle. Lila, your voice deserves more than cafes and small weddings. It deserves the world. I want to help you. Her eyes widened. Help me. Why? Because, he said after a pause, you helped me without even knowing it. Lila was stunned into silence. She searched his face for any hint of insincerity but found none. He wasn't saying this as a businessman offering a deal, he was saying it as a man who had been moved to his core. Still, doubt flickered across her expression. I don't know. People like me don't get chances like that. Then let me be the first to change that, Alexander said firmly. I'll arrange studio time, producers, whatever you need. All I ask is that you don't stop singing. Tears welled in her eyes. She had dreamed of this moment, but dreams often felt so far out of reach. And now, here was a man the world saw as untouchable, telling her she was worthy. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, Alexander replied simply. Over the next few months, everything began to change. Alexander kept his word. He arranged for Lila to record her songs, introducing her to people in the music industry who were eager to hear fresh, authentic talent. At first, she was overwhelmed, but with Alexander's quiet support, she grew more confident. For Alexander, those months were transformative too. He found himself spending more time with Lila and her brother, often visiting the modest apartment they lived in. He would help the boy with homework, or share simple meals with them, meals far humbler than what he was used to, yet far warmer than anything he had ever had in his penthouse. Slowly, the walls around his heart began to crack. He laughed more, smiled more, and sometimes, when Lila sang privately for him, he found himself closing his eyes, letting her voice soothe wounds he had never dared confront. It wasn't long before the world noticed. Lila's first single, recorded with Alexander's support, began to gain attention online. People were drawn not just to her voice, but to the raw honesty in her songs. She wasn't polished, she wasn't manufactured, she was real. And in a world full of pretenses, realness was rare. One evening, as they sat together on the rooftop of her apartment building, Lila turned to him. Why are you doing this, Alexander? Really? He looked at her for a long time, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. Because you reminded me of something I forgot. That life isn't about money or power. It's about connection. About feeling. And Lila, you made me feel again. Her breath caught. She had seen glimpses of the lonely man beneath the CEO, but hearing him say it aloud made her chest tighten. And you know what else? Alexander added softly. That night at the wedding, when you sang, you saved me. You didn't even know it, but you did. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with unspoken emotions. For the first time in years, Alexander Reed wasn't just a lonely CEO. He was a man who had found someone who saw him, not his wealth, not his reputation, but him. And it had all begun with a song.